Good morning and welcome to (1302). I will continue the interesting article by McClelland. I can highly recommend it for read. There will be a link to it in the description, and it's on the same theme of affordances. And how they work in different systems. I will continue where I took off at page 404. It's a definition for affordance. Affordance: X affords phying for S if and only if X offers an opportunity for S to phy. The entity X that offers an opportunity for action needn't be an object. A particular configuration of traffic might present an opportunity for me to cross the road, but here it is the overall situation that presents the opportunity to phy rather than some particular object. Relatedly, X can present an opportunity to phy without X being the target of my phying. When a teapot affords gripping, it is the teapot that gets gripped. But when a traffic configuration affords crossing, it is not that traffic configuration that gets cross. Equipped with the definition of affordances above, we can define mental affordances as those affordances such that the afforded action phi is a mental action. Mental events can be distinguished from bodily events by their being covert. They involve internal changes to our mental states and do not essentially involve any physical movement. The things we do mentally include, though are by no means limited to attending, imagining, remembering, evaluating, deciding, inferring, calculating, and judging. In the line with the definition of action above, mental actions are those mental events that are under our control. Deliberately recalling the name of my first teacher is an intentional mental action because I initiate and continue the process of recollection. In contrast, when a spontaneous memory of a childhood trauma springs into my mind, this mental occurrence is outside my control, so is a mere mental event. And as absent-mindedly reminiscing about long-lost pets is a non-intentional mental action, because I could stop it even though I in fact don't, meaning that the mental process is under my control. There is considerable debate over the extent to which we have agency over our mental processes. Some have argued that our mental agency is extremely narrow in scope. However, such conservatism plausibly reflects an excessively demanding conception of action. We actively control some of our mental processes, and many others are controllable, if not actually controlled. Indeed, the unwarranted assumption that all mental actions must be actively controlled could underwrite the mistaken claim that mental action is rare. So long as one acknowledges that there are mental actions, it will be hard to deny that there are mental affordances. If we actually perform mental actions, then there must be situations in which it is possible for us to perform those mental actions. An opportunity for mental action is nothing more than a situation in which it is possible to perform a mental action. An opportunity for mental action is nothing more than a situation in which it is possible to perform a mental action. And a mental affordance is nothing more than an opportunity for mental action. Mental affordances are thus ubiquitous. A stimulating documentary affords reflection. An old photo album affords reminiscing. A place of worship affords contemplation. A fantasy novel affords imagining. And a philosophy paper affords evaluation. In some of these cases, the object or situation X that affords fying is the target of the mental act. The documentary does not present an opportunity to reflect as such, but rather an opportunity to reflect on the very documentary. In other cases, X affords fying without being the target of the afforded act. A space might afford contemplation without affording contemplation of that very space. Positing mental affordances is easy to justify because the conception of affordances I have offered is not very demanding. one might worry that the concept this undemanding is unlikely to be of much theoretical value, and consequently that MAH will be hollow. However, the real theoretical work is not done by affordances as such, but by our sensitivity to them. The substance of MAH is that we are sensitive to mental affordances in much the same way as we are to bodily affordances. It is to this sensitivity that I now turn. How are we sensitive to affordances for bodily action? The literature suggests that our sensitivity to affordances for bodily actions has two layers. First, we are able to perceive affordances for bodily action. Second, perceiving those affordances potentiates the afforded action that is automatically prepares the subject to perform that action. I explore these in turn. From affordances to affordance perception. A key claim made by many affordance theorists, including Gibson, is that we are perceptually sensitive to affordances. On this view, recognizing the climbability of a tree is not a matter of seeing a set of qualities. Then inferring that an object with those qualities is climbable by you. Instead, you can simply see its property of being climbable. This claim can be made without any commitments regarding the nature of our perceptual relation to affordances. Gibson's understanding of affordances is bound up with a number of these theses regarding affordance perception, including that affordances are perceived directly rather than via a mental representation, that affordances are perceived through optic flow, information without any need for internal processing, and that in ordinary perception we are aware exclusively of affordances. However, we should understand affordance perception in a way that is consistent with a representational view of affordance perception. Affordance perception requiring internal processes that disambiguate ambiguous sensory inputs and ordinary perceptual awareness being characterized not just by affordances but by objects and qualities. To say that we are perceptually sensitive to affordance is not to say that we are perceptually sensitive to all affordances. You might be perceptually attuned to climbing affordances, but not to juggling affordances. And you might fail to perceive particular climbing affordances if background conditions are not met. For example, if you are not in the requisite state of mind, or if the affordance is somehow masked Furthermore, you might misperceive a tree as climbable when it is not, with potentially embarrassing consequences. Exactly how and when we perceive or misperceive affordances is an open question that continues to attract investigation. Why think we perceive affordances? A key motivation comes from reflection on our phenomenology. Some report that they perceptually experience the teapot not just as white and as smooth, but as grippable. This is similar to our perceptual experience of other so-called high-level properties. Seeing something as a monkey, as an orange, or as Donald Trump contributes something extra to your perceptual experience of the object. Something irreducible to changes among the low-level colors, shapes, and textures we experience. Furthermore, whether you perceive these properties will depend on what perceptual capacities you have acquired and what mindset you're in. Unlike these properties, though affordances are properties an object has relative to a subject at a time. The teapot is grippable by you from one stance, but not another. So should be perceived as such, whereas Trump is Trump from any position. Poor Trump. The most vivid cases of affordance perception are those in which we experience an action not just as available, but as positively solicited. Considering the way in which we experience a ringing phone as demanding to be answered, an itch as demanding to be scratched, or a cake as demanding to be eaten. In the teapot case, we might experience the object as available for gripping without experiencing any particular urge to grip. But in these other cases, we are drawn to perform the afforded act. It is unclear how exactly to cash out the metaphor of being solicited or demanded to act on an affordance. These objects are not, after all, perceived as issuing commands. That said, this metaphor does designate a vivid and commonplace feature of our experience of affordances. One that I will try to shed light on shortly. Although Gibson himself did not argue for affordance perception on phenomenological grounds, he did note that his concept of affordances was inspired by similar notions introduced with a more phenomenological remit in Gestalt psychology. And regardless of Gibson's official stance on phenomenological evidence of affordance perception, the fact that it fits so intuitively with our phenomenology could well be responsible for the ideas having been taken up so widely. although phenomenological considerations will be important in this paper, we should not lose sight of the considerable explanatory applications of affordance perception. The most important of these concerns action selection. Prescott, Bryson and Seth explain that action selection is the task of resolving conflicts between competing behavioral alternatives, or more simply put, of deciding what to do next. By perceiving affordances in our environment, we perceive a menu of possible actions available to us. Although we're free to go off menu and adopt a course of action outside the perceived range of options. Most of our actions will exploit a perceived affordance. This saves us from the burdensome task of having to infer explicitly what kinds of action are available to us, freeing up our cognitive resources for the task of deciding which of the available courses of action is best. Without affordance perception, our capacity-limited cognitive resources would have a lot more work to do, making our selection slower and more vulnerable to overloading. With affordance perception, we can exploit a fruitful division of labor between rapid, automatic perceptual processes that present us with a menu of possible actions and slow, deliberative, post-perceptual processes through which we can select which action to perform. Excuse me. Although I take the facilitation of action selection to be the most fundamental explanatory application of affordance perception, it also has a range of other theoretical applications. Affordance perception is thought to underwrite our acquisition of skills, our comprehension of tool use, and our understanding of the actions of others. The first-person observation that we perceive affordances is thus corroborated by a range of third-person explanatory considerations. From affordance perception to potentiation, moving beyond Gibson, recent work in cognitive neuroscience suggests that our sensitivity to affordances has another dimension. A range of studies indicates that when we perceive an affordance, the motor patterns responsible for performing the afforded action or parts of that action are automatically readied. This automatic preparation of an action is called potentiation. In a study by Tucker and Ellis, subjects were required to identify their orientation of a presented object by pushing a button with the left hand when the object was upside down, or pushing a button with their right hand. With their right hand when it was the correct way up. This study revealed an interference effect. If the presented item was a teapot with a handle to the subject's right, then the response time was slower when the trial required a left-handed button push, but faster when the trial required a right-handed button push, and vice versa for a teapot facing the other way. Tucker and Ellis explain this interference in terms of subjects perceiving the teapot as affording a right-handed grasp. The readying of this right-handed movement makes a left-handed button push slower because the subject has prepared an action with the other hand. But it makes a right-handed button push faster for the same reason. Since gripping the teapot is not something the subject intends to do in this situation, the gripping response must be potentiated automatically. Any given perceptual environment will present a subject with a range of affordances. Does this mean that all the afforded actions are potentiated? Not quite. First, fying would only be potentiated if the subject perceives an affordance to fy. this is contingent on her being able to perceive fying affordances and on her being suitably sensitive to such affordances in that situation. Second, even if she does perceive a fying affordance, fying will only be potentiated if other background conditions are met. Although Tucker and Ellis propose that seeing a grippable teapot always potentiates a gripping response, Bob et al. Have data suggesting that potentiation may be contingent on what kind of task we are performing. The gripping response, for example, might only be readied when we are engaged in a task in which gripping is a likely response. Even though potentiation is contingent on the background conditions described, it remains the case that any given situation is likely to potentiate a range of actions. But wouldn't a readying of a whole range of incompatible actions cause difficulties for the acting subject? Chisek and Kalaska offer a promising account of how the brain deals with these contradictory signals. According to the affordance competition hypothesis, the motor patterns triggered by our affordance perception compete with each other for further processing. Various factors such as how optimal the opportunity for action is contribute to the success of one motor pattern over another. This automatic parallel process filters out some potential actions in favor of others. The losing signals make little or no difference to the subject's performance, while the winning signals are more fully prepared, setting the subject up to perform the relevant action. We gain an interesting clue as to how potentiation works from the phenomenon of utilization behavior. This is a condition caused by brain damage to the frontal lobe, in which subjects are compelled to utilize items they see. When presented with an apple, subjects eat it regardless of whether they are hungry. When presented with a toothbrush, they brush their teeth even in inappropriate context, such as a doctor's office. When presented with pens, they draw with them, even if there is no paper on which to draw. This condition has been interpreted in terms of subjects being unable to suppress potentiated actions. If certain background conditions are met, then the perceiving an apple as edible will potentiate the motor process responsible for eating. In a topical subject, if eating the apple is an unsuitable response, then that motor process is suppressed. But for subjects with relevant frontal lobe damage, such suppression is not possible, and they are compelled to eat. As with affordance perception, the potentiation of action functions to help us meet the challenge of action selection. Tucker and Ellis explain that intended actions are formed from and informed by already existing visuomotor representations. Actual actions are produced by the selection and elaboration of such representations. One of the key factors in successful action selection is speed. If the actions from which we are selecting are prepared prior to our selection, we can perform the selected action much more quickly than if we were starting from scratch. Sorry, this is this time of the year. I think it has to do with the very dry air inside of the houses. Potentiation also has wider theoretical applications, including roles in the explanation of skill acquisition. Tool use and action understanding. I would like to focus on the phenomenological manifestations of potentiation. Compare the experience of catching a ball that is hurtling towards you with the experience of deliberately throwing the ball back to its owner. The agential phenomenology of the throw is one of spontaneous action, of causing oneself to throw the ball to its owner. In contrast, the agential phenomenology of the first action is one of having an action drawn out of one by stimulus. This kind of experience is better characterized as one of allowing an action to occur rather than of initiating it spontaneously. Potentiation helps explain what is distinctive about the catching experience. perceiving the oncoming ball leads to a strong potentiation of the act of catching. The relevant motor signal has not been knocked out by competition with other signals, nor by any automatic suppression of inappropriate actions. The subject is thus in a state such that she will reach to catch the ball unless she actively suppresses the relevant motor process. This means that to catch the ball, the subject can simply allow this process to unfold without having to initiate the act of catching from scratch. This explains why the subject's agential phenomenology is one of allowing rather than initiating. The fact that the process responsible for the subject catching was prepared prior to her intention to act does not preclude it from qualifying as an action. Her catching still falls under her control, in that she is free not to perform the potentiated action. Perhaps there are cases where the potentiation of an action is so strong that it is impossible to resist. But this is not the kind of case I am considering here. Potentiation also helps explain a feature of our perceptual phenomenology that was left unaccounted for earlier. Soliciting affordances are those affordances that are experienced as in some way calling out to be acted upon. Perhaps the metaphor of solicitation can be cashed out in terms of the afforded action being strongly potentiated. The experience of feeling drawn to catching the ball is just the experience of your catching response being fired up. Very important. A response that needs to be actively suppressed if you don't want to do it. This contrasts with the perceptual experience of the teapot's non-soliciting, gripping affordance. You perceive the teapot as a grippable, but the potentiation of gripping is too weak to show up phenomenally. Perhaps because it has been knocked out of the affordance competition by better opportunities for action. In this kind of case, there would be no need to consciously suppress an impulse to grip. Furthermore, if you did grip the teapot, this would likely be experienced as something you actively do, rather than as something you simply allow to unfold. Put another way, not all motor signals are created equal. And so not all of them make their presence felt to us equally. Four, framing the mental affordance hypothesis. This is the MAH acronym. An object or scenario X affords the mental act of fying to a subject S if and only if X presents an opportunity for S to perform the mental act of fying. MAH is the hypothesis that we are sensitive to mental affordances in the same way as we are sensitive to bodily affordances. We have seen that our sensitivity to bodily affordances is characterized by perception of the affordance and under the right conditions, potentiation of the afforded action. MAHH is thus true if and only if there are affordances to perform a mental act phi such that perceptual requirement S, the subject, perceives X as affording phi and potentiation requirement. S perceiving X as affording phi potentiates S phi. Let's repeat that one. The mental affordance hypothesis is thus true if and only if there are affordances to perform a mental act phi such that perceptual requirement S perceives X as affording phi and potentiation requirement S perceiving X as affording phi potentiates S phi. I take these requirements to be individually necessary and jointly sufficient for MAH being true, although satisfaction of the second requirement entails satisfaction of the first, it would be useful to consider them separately. Some might object that these requirements are too demanding. After all, many theorists discuss affordance perception without any mention of potentiation. So perhaps MAH should be framed with only the first requirement. Against this, I would argue that we cannot capture the role affordances play in action if we disregard potentiation. Although there is a division in the literature between discussion of perception and of potentiation, this division is unnatural and unhelpful. If MAH is true, then this would tell us a great deal about the workings of many of our mental actions. The challenge of action selection concerns not just bodily action, but mental action too. In any given scenario, there is a wide range of mental actions available to us. And our challenge is to select the best course of mental action. To do so rapidly and to avoid overloading our capacity limited cognitive resources. MAH proposes that just as our selection of which bodily action to perform is facilitated by our sensitivity to our environment's affordances for bodily action, our selection of which mental action to perform is facilitated by our sensitivity to our environment's affordances for mental action. We experience a menu of possible courses of mental action, some of which are automatically readied prior to selection, and many of our mental actions follow the offerings of this menu. The breadth of this menu will vary. When we are particularly focused, there might be just one course of mental action that presents itself to us. there will also be cases where we go off menu and perform a mental action without perceiving any affordance to perform that act. Since mental actions are less constrained by our environment than bodily action, this might be more commonplace with mental action selection. Nevertheless, the experience menu of mental actions will often have a role to play in this conception of mental affordances, mirrored by anything already in the literature. In design theory, Hartson introduces the notion of cognitive affordances. But these are understood as features that aid an agent's understanding of the use of an artifact rather than as opportunities for mental action. Also in design theory, Zhang and Patel define cognitive affordances as those affordances that depend on background knowledge, such as a post box that affords posting only to an agent with an understanding of the postal system. Again, mental action is not the concern. In artificial intelligence, Robal and Moratz developed an artificial agent that is sensitive to affordances to deliberate about which bodily affordance to act upon. Sloman similarly posits deliberative affordances for human subjects. In neither case, though, is there an exploration of a broader class of mental affordances. In the philosophical literature, Scarantino seems to share my conception of mental affordances, but only mentions their possibility in passing. None of the more developed positions seem to be targeting the same kind of thesis. Proust posits cognitive affordance sensing, but her concern is specifically with metacognitive feelings, and her characterization of these affordances as non-conceptual appraisals of one situation diverges from the conception I offer. Rietveld and Kieverstein explores affordances for high-level actions. Some of these actions might be characterized as mental. Though the authors themselves seem to resist the division of actions into bodily and mental, they also diverge from my proposal by adopting a distinctive normative conception of affordances on which affordances have an existence on the abilities and practices found within a form of life. Mathen argues that the concept of affordances should be extended beyond bodily actions to encompass what he calls epistemic affordances. These are affordances to perform epistemic mental actions such as co-classifying things, making inductive generalizations, and re-identifying an object. Mathen's insightful claims about how we perform epistemic operations on the basis of our sensory experience certainly offer potential applications of MAH. However, his proposal is much more narrower in scope than my own. His account does not allow affordances for non-epistemic mental actions such as imagining or attending. Nor does it allow affordances for mental actions that are learned rather than innate, such as the act of counting. These exclusions are bound up with a distinctive teleosemantic theory of sensory content that Mathen develops, so could not be lifted without compromising his wider philosophical project. It is also worth noting that although McClelland does hold that affordances for epistemic action figure in the contents of perception, the potentiation of mental actions has no place in his account. Metzinger's cognitive affordance hypothesis proposes a constant flow of possible mental actions. Unlike the other views discussed, Metzinger's proposal shares with mine the suggestion that a variety of mental actions are automatically prepared and compete with one another to be performed. However, Metzinger does not conceive of cognitive affordances as things we perceive in our environment. Instead, they are internal opportunities for action presented by one's inner environment of non-sensory mental events. In this view, an idea can afford reflection, but a book cannot. It is hard to extract Metzinger's claims about affordances for mental action from his wider theoretical project of assimilating mental action into a predictive processing framework. Metzinger also limits the scope of afforded mental actions to those that achieve certain epistemic results. So his proposal is again narrower in scope than my own. As with Maven, Metzinger's theoretical commitments mean that his account cannot be straightforwardly extended to encompass the wider range of the mental affordances that I propose. Since there is only a modest and somewhat disparate literature in support of mental affordances, it is perhaps unsurprising that very little has been said against the view that we are sensitive to such affordances. Nane holds that we perceive opportunities for bodily action, but denies that this can be extended to mental action. Although Nanai shows that his own arguments for the perception of bodily action properties do not extend to mental action, he does not give reasons to doubt that other arguments for the perception of mental action properties might be developed. He does suggest that opportunities for mental action are too sophisticated to be represented perceptually. But without a precise and independently motivated account of how sophisticated perceptible properties can be, this worry has little force. Five, free candidate mental affordances. Affording attention. Considering the following scenario adapted from Thatzel. You are working on your desk when a fire alarm goes off. It is a false alarm and the sound is turned off. But a fault means that the large red warning light continues to flash in your office. You find the warning light extremely distracting. Despite the distraction, you manage to keep your focal attention directed on your work. Sometimes it is impossible not to attend to a salient stimulus, like a low bang. In such cases, your attending is outside your control and therefore not an action. In the case at hand, though, you succeed in exercising control over your attention and keep it focused on your work. This does not say that you do not attend to the warning light at all. Indeed, a case could be made for thinking that wholly unattended stimuli are unexperienced, which would be at odds with the phenomenology of the scenario. Rather, you attend to the warning light only peripherally and resist the urge to bring it into focal attention. I suggest that this scenario is best described in terms of your sensitivity to affordances of focal attention. The warning light is a possible target for the mental act of focally attending. As such, the light presents an affordance for mental action. The question is whether you're sensitive to this affordance in the same way as you are sensitive to affordances for bodily action. Regarding the perception requirement, I propose that your perceptual experience represents the warning light as focally attendable. Although there are no uncontroversial criteria for distinguishing perceptual from non-perceptual states, a key feature of perceptual states is their relative cognitive impenetrability. A key feature of this scenario is that the opportunity to attend continues to impress itself on you irrespective of your belief that it is a false alarm. I would say this is incredibly important. Let's need to check how much playing time. Although you believe that there is no need to attend to the alarm and that your attention is better directed toward your work, you still experience a pull on your attention. This indicates that the process responsible for your experience is resistant to correction by beliefs, which tallies with it being perceptual. Regarding the potentiation requirement, the felt urge to attend indicates that attending is strongly potentiated. This felt urge is not explained by desire to attend. In the scenario described, you have no desire to attend to the light. Instead, automatic processes that are insensitive to your desires are pulling your attention toward the light. Your agential phenomenology points the same way. Considering the experience you would have if you stopped resisting the urge to attend to the warning light. Your experience would be one of effortlessly allowing your attention to be taken to the light, not one of effortfully directing your attention toward it. This suggests that the act of attending to the warning light is already strongly potentiated prior to your attending. In the case described, it might be hard to isolate the experience of the light as an attendable from the felt urge to attend to the light. A critic might object that the felt urge is real, but is not driven by perception of an affordance to focally attend. To address this objection, we should consider cases in which items are perceived as attendable but without any felt urge to attend. A promising case is one in which you attend to a salient person in a football crowd, and the surrounding crowd is perceived as attendable. Even in the absence of anything pulling your attention toward the surrounding crowd, I would suggest, following no, that the crowd are experienced as available. That is, as peripheral items that can be brought to the fore through an act of attention. Now, if we perceive items as attendable in these non-soliciting cases, it is plausible that items that do solicit our attention are similarly perceived as attendable. It is encouraging that long-standing empirical findings regarding our response to a salient stimulus mirror more recent findings regarding our response to the grippable teapot. Just as perceiving a grippable teapot prepares a gripping response, perceiving any salient item prepares an attentional response. And just as gripping responses compete with other motor responses to determine action, the attentional signals from different stimuli compete to direct attention. I think that is a good point to end the reading. It's becoming more and more clear, the parallels to Lees-Moulin and Unger. And I will also see, I see this also as an expansion of the Wittgensteinian project in philosophical investigations and the Brown Book. It is to show that the barrier between mental and bodily, material and immaterial, is not as cemented as we usually think. And especially taking Smolin, we see that the cementation itself makes understanding difficult, almost unreachable. It is only knowledge that can set us free, and this wonderful depthening of the single universe, as I would say, another aspect that helps understanding. I'm very grateful for that. I will have a more summary lecture in 2-3 episodes here when I have let the understanding sink in completely. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant morning, whatever remains of it. Bye bye for now.